because we full range of dates of when they occupied this. There is a traditional understanding that if you were the head of the village and you died, a prominent person in the village died, that sometimes the house would be burned. Yeah. So it's a possibility that that might have occurred at that time. There's not a good record of what's good about warfare, but there's not, further on the coast, further north on the coast, especially when you get into British Columbia, you have detailed battles between tribes. I don't sense that here. And at least in more recent times when Anglos were meeting with tribal members, these were known as friendly Indians that were cooperating with the people coming in. Here's one of the Western Oregon University students, and she's very carefully brushing away one of the burned planks there. So you do use all types of equipment when you're excavating, whatever you need, whether it's a feather brush or a bulldozer. Okay. And here's a picture of Patty, where Phillips, linguist, has been the cultural director for the Confederated Tribes of Coos, Umpqua and Siuslaw. We lost her to California through a marriage a few years back, but she still participates. And Patty was out with her GPS unit making sure that we didn't lose track of that site this time around. Well, we're moving up to your neck of the woods. We're moving into the Cape Perpetua area. I don't know whether you've seen this picture of the CCC camp. It was a Cape Creek camp that operated at Cape Perpetua between 1933 and 1941. And it was tucked into the forest. The visitor center today is on this flat above it, right here. If you go into the scenic area and up to the visitor center, you're going right through where one of the barracks stood. How quickly, 1941 wasn't all that long ago, but how quickly we lose touch with some of the cultural resources that we have. There's 300 men stationed here. Look at the west side of Cape Perpetua, because in this area are 4 sites that we have excavated, tested. One right here, another here where there's now an underpass coming up, another in this area, and one over by Cape Creek. These are all listed in the National Register of Historic Places. They all appear to have been seasonally used as primarily nice camping places where I went on my summer vacation. People were coming here to fish and to hunt and to collect mussels by the thousands, hundreds of thousands, and building up these shell middens. And leaving, taking the meat of the, primarily Milos edulus, the edible, well, we have two mussels here on the coast, but primarily the larger mussel that you see predominantly on all these intertidal areas on the rocky shoreline. And they would steam them open, smoke them, toss out the shells, and either feast, or store them for winter time. And they were coming to the Cape Perpetua scenic area on kind of their seasonal round. They knew I'm convinced that the tribal folks knew their environment so well. They knew the timing. They knew when the berries were going to be ripe. They knew when the fish were coming in the rivers. They knew when the elk were fat. And they would have their life cycling around the food resources that were available to them. These folks had a remarkable grocery store. They didn't have to be farmers. They didn't have to pray for rain to grow their crops. They could essentially, when the tide was out, the table was set. They could go out and harvest, and foods in abundance. So I think they had a very nice life, and I think a lot of us do the same kind of thing, don't we? And one of the reasons we like being here. It was curious, as this shell midden built up over time, it incorporated stone platforms, and you can maybe pick out some rounded cobbles that in the shell matrix wouldn't normally be there. They were brought in, they were usually lined up side by side, probably a fire was built on top of them. They would let those rocks eat, and then the food would be put on top of the rocks, covered over with skunk cabbage leaves or sword fern leaves, or hides and steamed until they were open, and then they could smoke them, eat them, whatever they wanted to do. And one of my favorite things is mussels, and you can still get, what, 72 mussels per person per day? Yeah. Well, not that you would want to eat 72 per person per day, but you can get them. Anyway, this is a site that was being eroded along Cape Creek, and it was the winter storms bringing up really gnarly the coastline in this particular area, and we were losing the site integrity. So we did the excavation so we could put a seawall in front of it. So if you go to Cape Perpetua and look out the window or go down the trail, that's what's behind the seawall. And if you have any doubt that archaeology is good for ecotourism, we excavated for 2 years at the site over a 3-week period during that time. And over 4,000 people came down to see us at that site. Just amazing. I was also realizing, just by coincidence, that a year ago today, I was at Machu Picchu. And there, boy, the Peruvian government has had to, they cut off at 3,000 the number of people who can go to Machu Picchu in one day. And you hear people all speaking languages from all around the world. Ecotourism regarding past lifeways and archaeology and history is big business. Not that that's what you necessarily want to do, but it certainly is something to think about for the community and for sharing the history of what has occurred here at different levels and different time periods. Now we're jumping to the last site that I was going to talk about. And it's this is the Salmon River estuary. You're looking down at the mouth of the Salmon River, Cascade Head to your left. And beautiful area, just north of Lincoln City. And this has been a site that has really been on the radar of geologists throughout the region because it has the best evidence of the last major earthquake and tsunami here on the Oregon coast. And the site is located up the river and around the bend, just almost at the very tip of the screen there, the photograph on the screen. And what we learned about this site was that even though it's about 2 miles inland from the ocean, and you could see the major bends that the river goes through, the 1700 earthquake sent tsunami waves into this area and deposited 4 to 6 inches of sand over this site. We did a tsunami drill last week. Tsunami is really is something that we don't want to just be thinking about tsunami as we think towards the future, but we also want to be thinking about that earthquake that may be occurring right offshore here too. This is Yoko Ota. She's a semi-retired Japanese seismologist that came from Japan to see the site and work on the site. She has visited every site in the world that has had a magnitude 8 or greater earthquake. And it was Yoka that was looking at the tsunami records in Japan that put together the date of when the last major earthquake hit here on the Oregon coast. Yoka was looking at with tsunamis that hit Japan where there wasn't an earthquake that hit off the coast of Japan that had set it off. And she realized that it was from the major devastating tsunami that had hit Japan had occurred here as a result of an earthquake that occurred right off the coast here on the Canadian subduction zone at 9:10 p.m., January 26, 1700. And now that was figuring, you know, the relative, or what geologists consider the typical speed of energy crossing the water, going across the water, of when that occurred. But this is the woman that was responsible for that. And you can see, this was the first part of the excavation, and you can see a little black line across here, kind of a feeling line. That was evidence of an occasionally used elk hunting camp along the Salmon River estuary, and where they processed it too. There was fire hearths, there was a lot of elk bone and some tools and that sort of thing. And right above it, it's a little difficult to make out on this slide, but is the deposit of tsunami sand. Yeah, it's a big deal. It's going to happen here, and tsunami is just not one wave, it can be a series of waves. I should also mention this whole area subsided too as a result of the earthquake. And that probably facilitated the sand moving over the site too. And because it had subsided, it's a site that's submerged a lot, and we're losing this site, so we had to do data recovery on it. But the profile that has been taken from this site has traveled all around the Circum-Pacific and been on display, because it is such a good record of that last earthquake. So maybe I should talk a little bit about earthquakes. Don't want anybody to panic, but it's one of those things that it's going to happen. Nobody knows when. There's earthquakes. If you go onto the Department of Geology and Mineral Industries website, you can see the daily earthquakes that are always occurring off the Yachats area. That's where I'm always looking. So I want to know if there's something happening out there. Usually they're just very small, but once it gets up to 6.6 on the Richter scale or so, you really need to be concerned. Now there's been 7 6.6 or larger earthquakes that have occurred in the last 2,000 years. And we don't know when the next one's going to be. But the subduction zone is just off the coast here. Well, I shouldn't say just off the coast, depending where you are on the Oregon coast, because you know it's not a straight line, and the fault line actually trends from the northwest to the southeast. It's anywhere from 60 miles to 150 miles. But it doesn't give you a whole lot of time if you've got transmission of energy at the rate of 250 miles an hour coming at you. You don't have a whole lot of time to really be making serious thoughts about serious actions of what you want to do. You need to kind of be thinking about that. It's going to, when it happens, and I don't mean to be doomsday, but when it happens, it's going to really impact us here.
I have a question before you leave this. On this site here on the Salmon River, considering the remoteness of the locale, how was it first discovered to begin with?
It was studied by a graduate student, Wendy Grant, at Oregon State University, who was looking at Cascadian earthquakes, and she had found an area that had been up on the Halem Bay that had a nice profile at low tide, and she was going into all these estuaries to see what she could find. So that was originally the way she found it. Yeah.
Phyllis, again on this site, you were talking about a layer of tsunami sand. Is there something about that kind of a layer that you can identify it right away as tsunami sand because it looks or feels different, or is it just a matter of carbon dating a particular layer to a time when you knew an earthquake occurred?
That's a really good question, and I don't know if I can answer that adequately like a geologist would, but wherever you have a site where there's just an immediate reconfiguration, where you have a complete wipeout of a particular zone and a deposition of even a trace, you know that something has occurred there. Now, it could be deposited by water, it could be deposited by wind, you know, there's other causes of that. There's been some considerable study on the Coquille River at archaeological sites there, and they have recorded tsunami sands of the Coquille River 6 kilometers inland.